So anyway, yeah,
Maggie's back
so
there.
some months ago,
Relief
we
too.
had presented some very high-level breakdowns of our demographics by segment, and the committee, in their ever-ending desire to get more data, asked if we could provide more information on that. So this is what the item is about, and just sort of breaking down the demographics of our membership in terms of their retirement, their age, a variety of issues, but have it broken down by employer types. And what I'm going to present, actually, oh, here it is, isn't just a repetition of what's in the item, but actually what it does is it shows that information, then compares it to what those characteristics were back in 97, 98. So you can see the extent to which it's changed over time. In some cases, we've seen some changes. In some cases, things have been fairly stable. The first one is you're sort of seeing the changes in the percentage of our total membership who are retired versus active, and you'll see that the percentage of our total membership has dropped from who is active has dropped from 73% to 64%, and Nick and Mark are here and Rick are here again. They can certainly speak to it, but that's not that uncommon and is reflective of a maturing plan. And we have demographics where we have an older population. So in and of itself is not particularly alarming. It's something that should be expected, but it's just something that we have seen occurring over the last several years, that we have an increasing percentage of our membership is retired as opposed to continuing to work. Yeah.
Jump in there, Sharon.
Oops.
So,
Oops,
back to
what's
that,
this?
yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
So, when we have the language at the bottom of every document I see that says about CalSTRS or hybrid system, and we have 860,000 members. So is that disability, or what's the?
The additional people
So,
are
am
on
I reading that
disability.
correctly?
They may be
Okay.
on disability. They may be on survivor benefits. They may be
Disability,
and
survivor
inactive.
benefits.
This is not including
Got it.
inactive. We have a large
Okay.
number of inactive
Inactive,
members.
disability, and
And survivor benefits.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks,
is the difference.
thanks.
And then, so this is showing the changes in the relative proportion of our active membership that's in the different employer types. And what you'll see here is that there has been an increase in the percentage that's in charter schools, although to a large degree that's because charter schools were still a relatively new phenomenon. They weren't, the act that established charter schools was enacted 5 years, in 1992, so it was still a very, very, very small proportion of our population. It's increased to some degree. The K-12 population, the relative population has decreased, but it's not the numbers. The total number of K-12 members is higher than it was 15 years ago, but the percentage of our total active membership that is in K-12 has declined to some small degree. So just
Sorry, just make sure the denominator on this chart is the 850 or the 650?
is a 650. No, the denominator in this case is for 12-13 would be the 416,000 active members, and in 97-98 would be the 385,000 active members.
Okay, got it, okay.
Paul has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, could we go back to the previous slide? So, do we expect this to taper off, what looks like a pretty dramatic rate of, change in those percentages? Two questions. Number one, is that tapering off? And number two, why is this happening? Is it the demographics of the population of the whole state? Is it that retired teachers are living longer? Because what I'm trying to get a sense of is, what are we going to be looking at 5 years from now? And did we accurately anticipate 5 years ago where we are today?
Well, and I'll let Rick weigh in on just a couple comments. One is, to a large degree, the active membership is a function of the economics or the economy, and in terms of whether or not there's more teachers and all that, that's what a lot is going to drive the active membership. The retired membership, to a significant degree, obviously, is the demographics of the members. Although we have fewer people retiring in a given year now than was true a few years ago, because there were so many incentives for people to retire.
Right.
But and I think the last time we looked at it, it isn't out of line in terms of number of retirements. It's within the range that we would expect it given the demographics of our membership. But I'll let sort of Rick follow up.
Good morning, board members,
Morning, Rick.
Madam Chairman. Just a little bit of history. I'm going to answer your last question first. About 10 years ago, we actually did do a projection of future retirements, doing the exact thing that you're asking. We haven't done it since. I guess we can revamp that if the board desires. What we found was something very interesting. The actual leveling off of the membership was projected, and the reason why it's projected had to do with the baby boom population. And so the baby boom population started from 1946 to 64, when the baby boomers were basically born. And so now they're in retirement mode. But what we found was that the active teacher membership increased to teach the baby boomers in school. And so the big increase in the teacher population were those teachers actually teaching the baby boomers. As the baby boomers moved through adulthood, the teaching population began to narrow, and we did have, class size reduction, which also got eliminated mainly due to budgetary concerns. So there were two reasons. And so actually, we had our big increase in the teacher retirement starting around 97, started to go up, and we projected, because the teacher population itself was declining, that after about 2006 or 7, it would start to level off. We actually looked at immigration of young kids and factored that into the teacher population. We also looked at, we had to make some judgment about the class sizes, and we thought because of the budgetary situation in California, practically every 8 to 10 years, there's some budget issue, that they wouldn't be hiring more teachers. So we kind of put all that into a little model, and we did a report presented back in 2005 to the board. We haven't done one since. That actually relatively projected that. We projected about 8 to 10 years, somewhere like that. So we're kind of at the end of what that projected, but it did show that. So it's not a surprise to at least to us, that what has happened. I think it happened to a greater extent, maybe because of the recession, than we expected, but the direction is what we expected. We expected a level off of teachers, so.
And we do project the retirements every time we do an experience study every 4
Right.
years. We do project
Yeah.
retirements. So we're constantly refreshing that based on actual experience and given the demographics of our active membership, to what extent we anticipate they will retire.
And when do we do that?
2016 will be the next one. We
So
just
every
did
4
it-
years,
Every
we
four
Yeah, we
do
do it every
that.
4 years. We just did it in 2012.
So,
Paul, anything else?
Just, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, Harry?
This is a little additional detail on the active side. Rick mentioned it. In 08, 09, we had 459,000 actives. In 12, 13, we have 416,000. If my math is correct, that's a reduction of about 8% or so of actives. And that's right at the recession. And as Rick mentioned,
That's
the
good.
first thing that happened in most school districts across California was the K-3 class size reduction, which was implemented under Governor Ray Davis. Class sizes in public schools, in most public schools, in grades K through 3, so that's 4 grade levels, was at 20-1 for that period of time. The first course of action during the recession for most school districts was they immediately went from 20-1 back up to 30-1 in grades K through 3. So that's how and the other option was through these, as we talked about, the early retirement incentives, when they were offered during this period, especially at secondary levels, schools, when secondary teachers would take the early retirement incentive or would leave through natural retirement or natural attrition, school districts would not fill those positions, so essentially keep other people in jobs. So I think that was a direct result. That was a major contributor. And now what we're seeing, I would forecast going forward, I think as the economy has improved and as Governor Brown has increased his, the state's commitment to funding public schools, educators in California have been really given a choice after like 5 or 6 years of no pay raises. What the choice has often been, do you guys want do you want a pay raise for the first time in 5 or 6 years, or do you want more teachers in our schools to reduce class sizes so you can have more employees, or you can have a pay raise? What would you like? So I think looking out of the next 5 years, I would suspect we probably will see a tick up in the number of educators we have. So
You'd
that's
rather
a
have
little bit
smaller
more
class sizes?
on the grounds, detailed look at that issue. And I think the retired is probably primarily around people who are just living longer.
People are living longer, and they've been living longer than what we have projected. The Society of Actuaries has just introduced a new mortality table that demonstrates that. But even discussion around that is that maybe that's not even long enough, according to what we're beginning to see and what we're beginning to understand about the new changes in science and biotech. So that's been another issue with the retires, is just they're living a lot longer.
Yeah, and we've always heard that teachers live longer than any other profession, and California teachers live
Yeah.
longer than that.
Yeah, yeah.
And the women that teach in California live even longer.
Yeah, that's been
But in heavily predominant,
generally true.
female-oriented
Across
profession.
the country and in California, the life expectancies are longer than for the average population in most individual professions, so.
And will those new mortality tables be incorporated into the?
Paul, go ahead and check in.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so they're two.
I was just saying that, so the new mortality tables that are, will the actuarial study that comes to us in April be based on those new
No.
mortality tables?
No, so we'll look at new mortality at the next experience study, which will be in 2016. And there are two pieces to the mortality tables that have been introduced. One is looking at the current population and kind of the mortality of the group that's got studied. The other is a projection of mortality improvement. And so there's a component of what do we expect mortality, how do we expect mortality to improve over the next 15, 20, 25 years? And so those results we'll look at when we're doing our own mortality study. We look at our own population separately. So the current mortality of our population, we do our own individual studies. And then we'll be looking at what the society has introduced as mortality projections to incorporate into the study. So yeah, we'll be including those results in our next study.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. All righty. Ed, back to you.
Yeah, so any questions about this, and I'll move on to the next slide, which is the sort of the distribution of the membership by part-time and full-time. And when we're referring to people who have part-time assignments, and they may have multiple part-time assignments, so they may actually end up working on a full-time basis in a variety of employers, but they are getting assignments that are on a part-time basis. And you can see it, there's a couple of things. Number one is you can see the extent to which the community colleges are much more reliant upon part-time faculty than K-12 is. But at least comparing the 2 years, it's been relatively stable. Now, the other thing I just want to point out is we're talking about part-time employees who are in the DB program. There is a significant percentage of part-time employees who are not in the DB program. They're either in cash balance or they're in other alternative retirement plans such as PARS or Apple, or they may be in Social Security. So these numbers are just part-time faculty who are in the DB program. And you can see that percentage of the DB members working in the community colleges has maintained about 42% is part-time and 58% is full-time.
I understand that this slide is showing the DB side.
Right.
Do we see the same stability in the cash balance program?
Cash balance plan, as you'll see later on, the cash balance plan membership participation has dropped off because, as we point out in the item, there were some significant changes made in the eligibility of how service credit gets calculated for part-time community college back in the late
Right.
'90s.
Which made them more eligible for the DB,
Right, because quite honestly, the way it was before that, they were not receiving service credit that was commensurate with the percentage of work they were actually working.
Right.
So that got fixed, and as a result of that, people are vesting at the appropriate rate, and therefore the DB program became more attractive, and therefore cash balance became less attractive, and alternatives became less attractive. So yeah,
Right.
so the active population of CB has declined.
All righty, thank you.
Oops, did I get this right? Oh,
Go ahead.
On that, because I think the issue for part-time community college faculty is vesting in
Mm-hmm.
DB. And so it takes a lot longer for a part-time community college faculty. You know, you have to get 5 years in full-time service in DB to be vested. So if you're a part-time community college faculty teaching one class
Yeah,
a
you
semester,
never
it could
vest.
take you, 15
right.
years. So that's the challenge
Right.
for them.
Whereas before the law change, it would have taken that person 30 years.
It would
to
have taken
vest.
them
So
twice
it
the
was-
amount of
I mean, it
time,
was
yeah.
way out of whack. So, but it is still a challenge for casual, for lack of a better term, casual faculty to vest in DB, whereas in cash balance, they vest from the first day. Here it shows the distribution of the parts of the membership by gender. So you can see that, looking at our overall membership, it's 72% female and male, but you can see that the distribution is very different at the community college level, where it's now 54% female and 46% male, and that's a little bit of a change from 15 years ago. But I mean, so you can see that the community college is not predominantly male, but certainly a higher percentage of population that is male. And also just to remind people that when we're referring to charter schools, that those charter schools that we're talking about are charter schools that are not reporting through a K-12 district. So they are in what we refer to as independent charter schools. There are other charter schools that are part of a school district and they report through their school district, and we don't have any visibility of that, of who's a charter school in an independent district versus in a traditional school.
Eric?
Ed, I have a question about the charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
Do all charter schools in California, are they required to provide a retirement?
No, they may elect in their charter whether to be in DB, which I believe is about 80% of the schools do that. But
They'll-
it's entirely up to the charter school whether or not they participate in.
But are they required to give a pension?
They have to be. Everybody has to be in something.
Okay.
And that's a federal law. I mean, if you're not in
They can be in
CalSTRS or you're not in some alternative plan, you're going to be in Social Security.
So what percentage of the charter schools
I believe it's
participate in
80%
CalSTRS?
have elected to be in CalSTRS.
Okay.
And it may be cash balance, although I'm
Okay.
sure it's virtually all. I
And
think
what,
they're almost all in DB.
80% of what number? Of total?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if.
I don't need
Yeah,
it
I don't
now,
know.
but I'd like to know what the 20%, how many
We can get that. I mean,
Yeah,
we
I'd be
have,
interested
we,
to know.
we track the charter schools very closely. I just don't know the numbers
Yeah.
offhand. We can come back to the committee and give you those
and if
numbers.
there was a desire to require all charter school employees, not saying that there would be, but to all charter school employees shall be,
Mm-hmm.
in certificated employees shall be in CalSTRS, that would be legislation?
Yes,
That would be.
that would require it. Yeah.
It would be interesting to look at how many what would that actually mean for our system? In terms of how many,
It's probably, I mean, in terms of the impact it has on the system, it's probably not huge because there's not a gigantic population of charter school employees.
right,
So even if you got the other 20%, it probably wouldn't have a tremendous
but is that
impact.
is that number gonna grow over time, or is it gonna
It could,
decrease, or gonna
yeah.
remain flat, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Anyway, so, and
We
also
can look at we can look at the trends in charter school membership as well and see
I-
how that's changed over time.
yeah, I would like to see
Sure.
that.
You can do
Is that all right? Dana?
Absolutely. Unless,
Okay, so this is sort of showing the age of the current active membership. And as what you can see is that across the board that they are slightly older than they were 15 years ago. And it's obviously those people are 15 years older, but I'm talking about the average age of active members in the different employer types. So, before looking at the K-12, it was a little under 44 years of age. Now it's a little over 45 years of age. The community college is almost 50 years is the current age, and now it's over 51 years of age. The entry age, just so you know, that represents the age in which they started, in the average age in which they started to work in CalSTRS. So you can see that the average entry age has increased now, where it's 34 for K-12 and 38 or almost 39 for community college. So people are a little bit older than they were 15 years ago, and they're starting to work older than they did 15 years ago. Yeah, that is interesting.
Go ahead, Sharon. Yeah, that
You know,
they're now
my guess
older
is-
than what the
to be
average
honest-
age is.
To be honest with you, I think to some extent that, the other numbers that are very interesting with the charter schools, and partly it's because the population is much smaller, so you probably end up with that individuals will have a bigger impact on the average. But I suspect that to a larger degree, and this is just my speculation, is that charter schools back then were probably hiring people who were more experienced teachers. Now it seems like they're hiring people that their first job may have been in the charter school, because they're seeing that they're older, but they have less service credit. And you'll see that later on, that the amount of service credit they've got is actually, I believe has dropped. You'll see that in a couple of slides, that the average service credit of a charter school employee has dropped significantly in 15 years.
No, that's interesting, because I would have thought that a lot of the reason for the higher entry age was that there were people that were let go during the recession from regular non-charter schools that were then going to work in charter schools.
Right, but this is entry
But-
age
but-
into CalSTRS, not into the charter school.
Oh,
Entry
okay.
age
Oh,
into
okay,
the
okay.
system.
That's right, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So
All
I
right.
think it's possible that they were let go in another state and came here to
That's-
work in a charter
that's
school.
true.
So they might have prior
Yeah.
educational
Right.
experience, but not with us.
Right.
Interesting. All right, thank you.
Or maybe in a private school. That's another option. They may have been in a private school too.
Sharon?
So I asked our district in LACCD to do analysis about sort of the average age of faculty. And at my college, at LA City College, the average age of our faculty is 57 years, which I found very fascinating. But I also think it's interesting, the community colleges, because typically people work in an industry or something for 10 or 15 years, or like cinema, TV, they work in Hollywood for 10 or 15 years and then they want to, teach or something like that. So our age tends to be, especially in some of the CTE programs and stuff, tends to be, in the late 30s or early 40s and stuff. So it's fascinating to kind of look at the different demographics of the different members that we serve, so. Yeah.
So this shows you the change in the service credit, and you can see that in 1997, looking at the charter schools where there's a dramatic change, that the average had 30 years of service, and they were 60 years old. Now they're 62 years old, but they only have 18 years of service. So again, I don't know for sure why that's happening, but I mean, there could be a couple of explanations that either they're less experienced or they may have come from private schools or some other place. But you're seeing that the retirement age has increased across the board, and this is and again, this is service credit at the time that they retire. So the service credit is down a bit, but their age of retirement has increased.
Do we have this particular slide in our write-up?
No, we didn't show the comparisons in the write-up. We have the data, the 2012-13 numbers are in the write-up.
And we have access to this.
Yes,
slide.
everything's on the website.
Thank you.
Yeah. You can see how much the final compensation, which largely reflects annual salaries, have changed over time. You can see the rate of inflation during that period of time was at 48%, the official California CPI. But you can see what the changes have been in final compensation and in the benefits over time. Mm-hmm.
There you go.
CPI during that time is 48% in
Mm-hmm.
California. And so for K-12, make sure I understand this correct.
It means the salaries went up
increase
54%. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And the benefits went up 70%. And the reason why the benefits went up was that during that period of time, there were changes in the benefit structure, which improved benefits for the majority of our members. So they're getting a bigger benefit. People retiring after the benefit changes took effect is going to be greater for a given final compensation than people who retired in 1997, 98. So that's why you see a one-year final comp, increased age factor, longevity bonus, there's a whole variety of changes that were made at that point that are reflected in that. And then this is sort of the extent to which you see people having more than one employer. Even in K-12, there are some small percentage, around 5%, who have more than one employer in K-12, but in community college, it's much more common. Yes, we call them freeway flyers. And in fact, I don't remember what we looked at this time. I remember at one point we actually identified people who had like 9 different employers in the community college, and they must be spending virtually all their time on the freeway. But as you can see, it's most of the members only have one employer. Most of the community college members only have one employer, but 15% of them do have 2 or more employers. So in terms of cash balance, you can say, like I was referring to before, a couple of things. One is you can see that the overwhelming majority of the cash balance participants are in a community college, which makes sense because they have a larger part-time population. The cash balance is only for part-time employees, and so you see that 93% of the cash balance participants are in the community college. But you see that the decline in the numbers over the last 5 years, and that reflects the extent to which DB has gotten to be a more attractive program. We've been working through a lot of issues with the part-timers, as Sharon well knows, to try to address that. So we're seeing a decline in the cash balance population. And then the other thing, I think this is probably the final slide, is that you'll see that when looking at the community college members and looking at their average entry age and their current age and their retirement age, you'll see, comparing that for cash balance versus the DB program members from the community college, you can see that cash balance people tend to start a little bit later in life. They're currently a little bit younger, but they do retire at a later age. The average age of retirement is almost 68 years old, which is quite a big average. I mean, it's quite a high average of retirement. And that's it. So I'd be happy to answer any of the questions about any of the
But
data.
I would say there are much fewer in that population cohort, so
Oh,
outliers
yeah.
would have a stronger
Absolutely.
influence
Yes,
on that number.
That's a good point. They would.
Thanks, very interesting. So I want to get back to the questions that I was asking at the beginning, because I'm trying to understand. We're going to be doing actuarial studies, or Milliman's going to be doing actuarial studies, and we do them every year.
Right.
But we're going to be basing the next one and after that on the experience study from 2012?
No, the one you do next year is the last one based on the current experience study. You'll do the experience study. The current plan is to do the experience study in February 2016, and then the April 6, 2016, you'll do the evaluation based on the experience study.
So here's, I guess, my question. From some of the conversations, some of the things that different people have said today, the new tables that the Society of Actuaries have come out with, it seems to me that there's a fair amount of evidence that our experience study from 2012 is pretty out of date. And what does that mean then in terms of the actuarial study that we'll be getting in 2015 in April? Or are we going to have Milliman tell us that the actuarial and longevity mortality assumptions are reasonable? In other words, is there any responsibility that we have, either as a board or our actuaries have, to incorporate any evidence that the 2012 experience study is out of date, if it is?
Rick?
Okay, so we we don't know it's out of date until we look at our own group of teachers.
Okay.
And so we've got to, so what the society has done is they've collected information from a lot of different sources to look at that. So they're looking at general population. They're not looking at specific at teachers that we're looking at. So we won't know how our group 4 years ago stacks up to the current until we look at it. And so
Okay.
in looking at, trying to look at mortality improvements for our group, we need to know what's happening with our group in the next 4 years to be able to make a judgment about how much of what the society is doing in mortality improvement actually applies to us. And so the society is a general mortality improvement. It doesn't specifically refer to us. We won't know until we actually do the study. So we don't know that our study is out of date. As a matter of fact, because teachers have been living longer for a long period of time, what we found is that other groups are catching up. For example, CalPERS, they made a big thing about the big increase in contribution rates for CalPERS, partly because of their mortality improvement. It's because a lot of different workers who were, having bad habits like smoking, overweight, bad diet, et cetera, the campaigns to get people to live a better, healthy lifestyle is paying off, and it's costing the pension plan. Well, teachers have been doing those kind of healthy lifestyles for years, so marketing to them to increase their, better lifestyle doesn't help as much as groups that haven't been doing it. And so part of the increase in the mortality improvements for lifestyles has been among populations that have not been living as healthy of a lifestyle. And that's part of the improvement in the society tables. When we look at our teachers who generally live a better, a healthier lifestyle, their mortality improvement may not be as great. And so we've got to look at our own population to be able to determine how much to include with the society's improvements. So
Okay, I guess, maybe, that's very helpful, but maybe let me state my question a little bit differently. So whose determination is it that the assumptions that will go into the 2015 actuarial study are still reasonable? Is that the board? Is that you? Is that Milliman?
Milliman will make a recommendation to the board. The board will approve the
Okay,
assumption.
so we'll get the professional
Yes,
opinion of Milliman with
But
respect.
the,
Thank you.
but the decision is the board.
Got it. Thank you.
And also, just to repeat what Rick had said earlier, is that as I remember, the mortality assumptions assume a projected improvements in mortality.
Yeah, we
anyway.
do. We look at our own population, and then we have a projection scale to say we're projecting so much improvement in mortality. That's the portion of the society work that we'll look more carefully at,
Got it.
is their improvement, mortality improvement assumptions, and how that applies to our population in particular. And so even though they released the tables, there's still more work to be done, and other people are now looking at what they've done more carefully. There was an academy, and this is probably more information you want to know, there's an academy letter to the society looking at some of the things that the society did in mortality improvements and making some recommendations for some changes. So people will now start to look at the results they have and start examining the results of the society's work. And so that also will take a little bit of time to go through.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, Nick, did either one of you want to comment? You don't have to, but if you want to, I wanted to give you an opportunity.
Very briefly. Can't be brief.
He's an actuary, he can't be brief.
Well, I just wanted to point out that the society's last tables were issued in 2000. These tables are issued in 2014.
Right.
We have a very regular process of every 4 years looking at mortality. So it's only been 2 years since the last time we've looked at mortality. So it's when we talk about the big improvements in the society's table, remember they're on a much longer time period. We're on a very regular study.
But our analysis every 4 years doesn't reference their work? Or is it completely independent of their work? Maybe that was.
Usually
sort
what
of
we do is we take
my
their tables
misunderstanding.
and we adjust their tables forward or
experience.
backwards. In the case of teachers, backwards, we say that 63-year-old teacher or a 65-year-old teacher might have the experience of a 63-year-old person in another profession.
But the analysis is based on the mortality of our members.
Exactly, and that's the key right there, is that we look at and CalSTRS is a very large, credible population to look at, and your mortality assumptions are based on the actual mortality of the California teachers.
So we're not failing to consider the 2014 actuarial tables of the society.
No.
We're ahead of them already, is what you're basically saying.
I'm saying you're current. You have 4 years is a very responsible schedule for regularly reviewing the assumptions. If you wanted to at some point think about having a different schedule, you could, but there's no reason to. 4 is a great
No,
schedule.
but you told me something that's important, because I didn't know whether we were 14 years out of date.
Yeah.
That's what
No, not at all.
Great, thank you.
And we use, society has different projection scales, so they have different ones for different type populations. And we actually, in our report, you'll see that we actually have taken some of their mortality improvement scales and kind of adjusted it for our experience. So we actually do very closely consider what the society is doing in mortality.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ed, thanks, Rick.
Just, and one
Thanks,
last
Mark.
thing, just to respond to Harry's question, because this is the advantage of having staff who can watch what's going on in the tower. I did get data from Peter Haley that we have.
Thanks, Peter.
As of June 30th, 2014, there were 1,118 active charter schools, and 990 of them, or 89%, had elected CalSTRS. But we can get you information about how things have changed and the number of members involved. We can get back to you. We just didn't have that offhand.
And what was that percentage again, Ed?
89%.
89, thank you. Maggie?
Maggie Ellis, Chair, CTA Retirement Committee, and also President of local Elk Grove Education Association. I can say that we've been hiring, so that's a good trend. And I really appreciate the comment about the lifestyle of teachers. And I think what we'll start to see also as we're moving forward, because of healthcare costs, wellness is very much a something on our minds, and we're really trying to increase our wellness so that we can decrease our healthcare. So there might be some in the future with that. I want to compliment Ed and the team for putting more and more data into here, because it's always interesting looking at our own population and how we can truly get a picture of who we are as an organization with CalSTRS. One question I do have, and I don't know if you have that information back on BS 48, with the part-time versus the full-time, is there any visibility of the part-timers of gender within the part-time? And is there any visibility of how much of that part-time is the Willie Brown reduced workload?
The part-time, yes, we would have the information about their gender, we just didn't publish it here. As far as Willie Brown, whether or not they're in a reduced workload program or not, we can certainly identify that. I would suspect because they're getting a full year of service credit, they may be counted in the full-time number.
Okay.
But we can certainly have information around who's in the reduced workload program, what their gender is and all that, if the committee was interested in that.
All right, thank you.
All right. So seeing that it is past 10:30 and past the first recess bell, I'd like to take a 5-minute break, because our next two items could last the full time that we have allotted for them, which is over an hour. So how about if we come back at 11:45? All righty, thank you.